The Lives of the Saints, by the Reverend Alban Butler, taken from the 4th edition, published in 1954. November 7th, Saint Willibroard, Confessor and First Bishop of Utrecht. Saint Willibroard was born in the kingdom of Northumberland towards the year 658, and placed by his virtuous parents, before he was 7 years old, in the monastery of Ripon, which was at that time governed by Saint Wilfrid, its founder. Vilgris, our saint's father, retired also into a monastery, afterwards became a hermit, and in his old age founded and governed a small monastery between the ocean and the Humber. He is honored among the saints in the monastery of Echternach and in the English calendars. Alcuin has left us an account of his life. Willibroard, by carrying the yoke of our Lord with fervor from his infancy, found it always easy and sweet, and the better to preserve the first fruits which he had gathered, made his monastic profession when he was very young. He had made great progress in virtue and sacred learning when, out of a desire for further improvement in the 20th year of his age, he went over into Ireland, with the consent of his abbot and brethren, where he joined St. Egbert or Ecgbert and the blessed Wigbert, who were gone thither before upon the same errand. In their company our saint spent 12 years in the study of the sacred sciences, and in the most fervent exercise of all virtues. Though his constitution was weak, in fervor and exactness he outdid the most advanced. He was humble, modest, and of an easy, obliging temper, and his whole conduct was regular and uniform. St. Egbert had long entertained an ardent desire of going to preach the gospel to the inhabitants of those unhappy countries in which barbarism and idolatry still reigned without control, and he had chiefly Friesland or Lower Germany in his eye. But he was diverted from that apostolical design by persons of piety and authority, who engaged him to employ his zealous labors in the islands between Ireland and Scotland, in all which he settled the true manner of celebrating Easter, especially at Heach, where he died a little before Bede wrote his history. St. Egbert is honored in the English calendar on the 24th of April. Bede gives a most edifying account of his austere penance, devotion, zeal, and charity. His companion, the holy priest Wigbert, went in the meantime to Friesland, but after staying there 2 years came back without having met with any prospect of success. This disappointment did not discourage Egbert and other zealous promoters of this mission, but excited them the more earnestly to solicit the divine mercy with prayers and tears in favor of so many souls who were perishing eternally. Willibroard, who was then about 31 years of age and had been ordained priest a year before, expressed a great desire to be allowed by his superiors to undertake this laborious and dangerous charge. St. Egbert, by the known zeal and great talents of our saint, and by his cheerfulness, doubted not but God had reserved to him the conversion of that nation, and encouraged him in this zealous design. St. Willibroard was joined by St. Svidbert and 10 other English monks in this mission. The authors of Batavia Sacra doubt not but our 12 missionaries landed at Katwijk upon the sea, which was at the mouth of the Rhine, before it was blocked up with sands, and thither the English were accustomed to export corn, even from the north coasting part of their island. The British Tower, as it was called, was built by the Romans at Katwijk to defend this harbour. Pepin of Herstal, or the Big, who was then at that time Duke of the French, received courteously St. Willibroard and his companions, but Willibroard set out for Rome, and cast himself at the feet of Pope Sergius, begging his apostolic blessing and authority to preach the gospel to idolatrous nations. The Pope, charmed with his zeal and sanctity, granted him the most ample licenses for that purpose, and gave him a great quantity of relics for the consecration of churches. With this treasure the saint returned with all possible expedition to his province, considering the pressing necessities and dangers of so many souls which called for his compassion and relief. St. Svidbert was taken from him, and ordained bishop of Brock-Torjans, who seemed to have inhabited the territory of Berg and the neighboring country towards Cologne. St. Willibroard, with his 10 other companions, under the protection of Pepin, preached the gospel with wonderful success in that part of Friesland that had been conquered by the French, so that after 6 years Pepin, by the advice of his bishops, sent the saint to Rome with strong letters of recommendation that he might be ordained bishop. His humility made him endeavor that some other should be pitched upon for that dignity, but he was not heard. Pope Sergius, who still sat in St. Peter's chair, received him with great marks and honor, changed his name into that of Clement, with great solemnity, ordained him Archbishop of the Frisons in St. Peter's Church, and gave him the pallium, with authority to fix his see in what part of the country he should think most convenient. The holy man stayed only 14 days in Rome, being impatient to return to his flock, and regretting an hour's absence from them more than was necessary to procure them greater advantages. He came back to Utrecht the same year, 696, and chose that city for his residence, Pepin having bestowed on him the royal castle of Wilteburg, which, as Bede assures us, was at Utrecht. St. Willibroard built at Utrecht the Church of Our Saviour, in which he fixed his metropolitical see, says St. Boniface, and that of St. Martin, though this latter he only restored, for it had been a church, but destroyed by the pagans. The Archbishop's indefatigable application to the conversion of souls seemed to prove that, with the new obligation he had received at his consecration of labouring to enlarge the kingdom of his divine Master, he had acquired fresh strength and a considerable augmentation of his zeal. In the second year after his episcopal consecrations, assisted by the liberality of Pepin and the Abbess Ermina, who is said to have been daughter of Dagobert II, he founded, in 698, the Abbey of Echternach in the Diocese of Triers, and now in the Duchy of Luxembourg, which he governed to his death. Alcuin relates that the nunnery of Horia, of which Ermina was abbess, had been delivered from a pestilence of water blessed by St. Willibroard, and by his saying Mass in the church. Pepin of Herstal, before his death, put away his concubine Alpius, by whom he had Charles Martel, and was reconciled to his wife Plectrudis, and in his last will, which is signed by Plectrudis, he recommended to St. Willibroard his nephews, without any mention of his natural son Charles, and bestowed on our saint the village of Svestrum, now Susteren, in the Duchy of Juliers, near the Meuse, with which the holy man endowed a nunnery, which he built there. Pepin of Herstal died in December 714. A little before his death, Charles Martel's son, Pepin the Short, afterwards King of France, was born, and baptized by St. Willibroard, who on that occasion is related by Alcuin to have prophesied that the child would surpass in glory all his ancestors. Charles Martel, in a short time, became mayor of the palace, and proved himself equally the first general and statesman of his age. In 723 he settled upon the monastery which St. Willibroard had erected at Utrecht to serve his cathedral all the royal revenues belonging to his castle there. Of this monastery St. Gregory was afterwards abbot. In succeeding times it was secularized. Several other donations of estates made by Charles Martel to several churches founded by our saint may be seen in Marius and others. By a charter, that prince conferred on him the royalties of the city of Utrecht, with its dependencies and appurtenances. By such establishments our saint sought to perpetuate the work of God. Not content to have planted the faith in the country which the French had conquered, he extended his labours into West Friesland, which obeyed Radbod, prince or king of the Frisons, who continued an obstinate idolater, yet hindered not the saint's preaching to his subjects, and himself sometimes listened to him. The new apostle penetrated also into Denmark, but Ongend, perhaps Bjorn, who then reigned there, a monster of cruelty rather than a man, was hardened in his malice, and his example had a great influence over his subjects. The man of God, however, for the first fruits of this country, purchased 30 young Danish boys, whom he instructed, baptized, and brought back with him. In his return he was driven by stress of weather upon the famous pagan island called Fositland, now Amaland, on the coast of Friesland, 6 leagues from Leeuwarden, to the north, a place then esteemed by the Danes and Frisons as most sacred in honor of the idol Fossite. It was looked upon as an unpardonable sacrilege for anyone to kill any living creature in that island, to eat of anything that grew in it, or to draw water out of a spring there without observing the strictest silence. St. Willibroard, to undeceive the inhabitants, killed some of the beasts for his companions to eat, and baptized 3 persons in the fountain, pronouncing the words aloud. The idolaters expected to see them run mad or drop down dead, and, seeing no such judgment befall them, could not determine whether this was to be attributed to the patience of their God or to his want of power. They informed Radbod, who, transported with rage, ordered lots to be cast 3 times a day or 3 days together, and the fate of the delinquents to be determined by them. God so directed it that the lot never fell upon Willibroard, but one of his company was sacrificed to the superstition of the people, and died a martyr for Jesus Christ. The saint, upon leaving Ameland, directed his course to Varkeren, one of the chief islands belonging to Zealand. His charity and patience made considerable conquests to the Christian religion there, and he established several churches. After the death of Radbod, which happened in 719, Willibroard was at full liberty to preach in every part of the country. He was joined in his apostolical labors in 720 by St. Boniface, who spent 3 years in Friesland, then went into Germany. Bede says when he wrote his history in 731, Willibroard, surnamed Clement, is still living, venerable for his old age, having been bishop 36 years, and sighing after the rewards of the heavenly life, after many conflicts in the heavenly warfare. He was, says Alcuin, of a becoming stature, venerable in his aspect, comely in his person, graceful, and always cheerful in his speech and countenance, wise in his counsel, unwearied in preaching and all apostolic functions, amidst which he was careful to nourish the interior life of his soul by assiduous prayer, singing of psalms, watching, and fasting. Alcuin, who wrote about 50 years after his death, assures us that this apostle was endowed with the gift of miracles, and relates that whilst he preached in the Isle of Vakeren, where the towns of Flessingu and Middelburg are since built, going from village to village, he found in one of them a famous idol to which the people were offering their vows and sacrifices, and, full of holy zeal, threw it down and broke it in pieces. In the meantime, an idolater, who was the priest and guardian of the idol, gave him a blow on the head with his backsword, with which, nevertheless, the saint was not hurt, and he would not suffer the assassin to be touched or prosecuted. But the unhappy man was soon after possessed with a devil, and lost his senses. By the tears, prayers, and zealous labors of this apostle and his colleagues, the faith was planted in most parts of Holland, Zeeland, and all the remaining parts of the Netherlands, whither St. Amand and St. Lewin had never penetrated. And the Frisons, till then a rough and most barbarous people, were civilized, and became eminent for virtue and the culture of arts and sciences. St. Wulfran, Archbishop of Sens, and others excited by the success of our saint's missions, were ambitious to share in so great a work under his direction. St. Willibroard was exceedingly cautious in admitting persons to holy orders, fearing lest one unworthy or slothful minister should defeat by scandal all the good which the divine mercy had begun for the salvation of many souls. It is also mentioned of him that he was very strict and diligent in examining and preparing thoroughly those whom he admitted to baptism, dreading the condemnation which those incur who, by sloth or facility, open a door to the profanation of our most tremendous mysteries. The schools which St. Willibroard left at Utrecht were very famous. Being at length quite broken with old age, he resigned the administration of his diocese to a coadjutor, whom he ordained bishop, and in retirement prepared himself for eternity. He died, according to Paggi, in 739, according to Mabillon in 740 or 741, and according to Mr. Smith in 745, some adhering to Alcuin, others to Bede, etc. St. Boniface says that St. Willibroard spent 50 years in preaching the gospel, which Mr. Smith dates from his episcopal consecration. Mabillon from his coming into Friesland, but others think these 50 years mean only thereabouts. Alcuin in Rabanus Maurus placed his death on the 6th of November, but the Chronicle of Echternach, Usoord, Addo, and the Roman and Benedictine martyrologies commemorate him on the 7th. He was buried as he had desired at his monastery of Echternach, and his relics are there enshrined at this day. The portative altar which he made use of for the celebration of the divine mysteries is traveling through Friesland, Zeeland, and Holland, is kept in the Benedictine Abbey of Our Lady ad Martyres at Triers. He whose life is regular and methodical, and who is solicitous and earnest, finds time to do with ease, and without a single thought of it, more business than seems credible to the slothful. This every Christian may experience, and, without the obligations of the pastoral charge, everyone owes so many and so great duties, both to others and himself, that, unless he is supinely slothful and wilfully blind, he will find business enough constantly upon his hands to employ earnestly all his moments.